Hi, Founder fans, Jason here, and today we are continuing our discussion with delegates to the First Continental Congress by traveling just a bit south to New Jersey, where we will be discussing these five gentlemen: Stephen Crane, John DeHart, James Kinsey, Richard Smith, and William Livingston. Now, with the exception of that last name, there aren't really any big punchers here when it comes to the American Revolutionary War, and that seems to be New Jersey, which seems to have sent more people who would go than their most revolutionary spirits at the time. You see, Jersey still had deep divides from about a century earlier when it was ruled as two separate colonies, East Jersey and West Jersey. And at this point, there are really two main cities or hubs of politics in New Jersey. There's Elizabethtown in the north, just outside New York City and very much associated with New York City, and Burlington in the south, not far from Philadelphia and very much associated with the politics of Philadelphia. And that does inform who is sent to the First Continental Congress from New Jersey. So let's start from the first guy right here, Stephen Crane. Stephen Crane was part of the Elizabethtown crew up by New York. He was from a fairly wealthy family, but not necessarily the wealthiest. He had served for a few years in the colonial assembly and had spent a year as the Speaker of the House. So he did carry a little bit of weight with his name. He had also been mayor of Elizabethtown, as you might imagine, a fairly important position there. And that's how he earns his spot to the convention. Now, again, we are focusing mostly on the First Continental Congress, though I will note for Crane, he does end up in 1780 getting killed by a German officer. He doesn't seem to have been fighting in the war. He was just traveling and found and killed. Additionally, he has some really interesting relatives in the literary world. A great-great-great-grandson that wrote The Red Badge of Courage. And his grandson, Ichabod Crane, is a name you might recognize, seems to have been the basis for Ichabod Crane from the Legend of Sleepy Hollow. So he does have a really interesting. He also has a bunch of generals and important military people in his ancestral line. But I did want to throw that out there. I found the Ichabod Crane thing fascinating when I ran into it. Now, John DeHart is also one of the Elizabethtown men. Coming up next, he goes to the First Continental Congress with probably the worst credentials of almost anyone at the Continental Congress. He had served in the Colonial Assembly by this point, and he would go on to become mayor of Elizabethtown. He actually would later go on to become a delegate, a justice on New Jersey's Supreme Court. So he ends up being a fairly important guy. However, right about the time he comes to the Second Continental Congress, but in November of 1775, New Jersey kind of has a mass resignation with DeHart and one of his fellow gentlemen we'll talk about in a second, where once the revolutionaries really start taking a hard line, they create the Navy, create the secret committee. There are many people in more conservative positions that are really afraid of what's going on. Now, again, DeHart does not become a loyalist. He actually, like I said, he goes back to New Jersey, and once independence is declared, is very crucial to creating the Constitution there and becoming a justice on the Supreme Court over there. James Kinsey, now we're moving down to Burlington. He's from the Burlington, more Philadelphia group, and he's very interestingly associated with John Hart. They have a lot of similarities. Again, Kinsey was not a very prominent member of the Colonial Assembly. He was not an outspoken patriot. He just seemed to be one of the guys who would go. Again, being from Burlington, it made it easier for him to show up. But Kinsey, once he gets there, starts to associate pretty heavily with John DeHart. Put Kinsey up here. They both kind of come to agreements on where New Jersey's position is for the revolution, and he, with Hart, the following year would resign in November of 1775, kind of as a show of solidarity in New Jersey with a Burlington man and an Elizabethtown man coming together to say, no, things are getting a little too extreme here, no thank you. Also, like DeHart, Kinsey would end up becoming a Chief Justice of New Jersey's Supreme Court, as well as holding various other positions in the young government. Now, next we're hitting up our last Burlington man, along with Kinsey, Richard Smith. And Richard Smith, he would last a little bit longer. No known image. This is a generic picture of the First Continental Congress. But Smith would go, he had, again, not really the best credentials at the time, not a standout leader of New Jersey. He would stick around longer than the other guys, but just a few days after independence was voted on, before the signing of the Declaration, but once independence was declared, Smith then resigns or is replaced. There are many people who don't support independence that are there for July 4th and July 2nd, 1776, who are very shortly thereafter replaced with people who are in favor of independence. Again, not a loyalist, although Smith does have an interesting life. He goes back, he serves briefly again in the Colonial Assembly, kind of fades out of consciousness until the end of the war. Then he moves to New York for a while, upstate New York, and then he ends up in Natchez, Mississippi, where he passes away. So, a pretty interesting character. And lastly, we're going to pop by William Livingston. Now, if there's a name you recognize in this list, it's probably going to be the Livingston family. In fact, William Livingston's brother, Philip, was also at the First Continental Congress representing New York. His other brother, Robert, was Lord of Livingston Manor. So he comes from a pretty wealthy background. He had already made a name for himself in New York City as a merchant and doing family business, and then had moved to Elizabethtown where he became a leader. And in fact, in the immediate aftermath of the signing of the vote on independence, Livingston leaves Congress and does not sign the Declaration of Independence. He leaves to go back to New Jersey, and he would become governor of New Jersey for 20 years. He would be the leader of New Jersey throughout the American founding. He also met his son-in-law at the First Continental Congress, although they probably knew each other before that. I shouldn't say met, but his son-in-law, John Jay, or soon-to-be son-in-law, John Jay, was also at the First Continental Congress. So of all the gentlemen we're talking about today, William Livingston is by far the most important to the American founding. The rest of these gentlemen, like I said, did attend the First Continental Congress. A handful of them had very important role in the creation of New Jersey, its constitution, and its judicial system. 2 of them served on the Supreme Court of New Jersey. But when it comes to the American founding at large, surprisingly small players. You know, from other states, we see a lot of First Continental Congress delegates becoming pretty important. Even if they become loyalists, they become important loyalists. Jersey, not so much. And I'm not, I of course don't want to taunt people from New Jersey. I'm very happy you're watching. Thank you very much. And you do have William Livingston there. And several other people from New Jersey are extremely important to the American Revolution. We just discussed Philemon Dickinson the other day, for example. But these are the delegates for the First Continental Congress: Stephen Crane, John Hart, James Kinsey, Richard Smith, and William Livingston. Of all of these, William Livingston is far and wide the most important American founder. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you did enjoy. If you did, hit like. Definitely subscribe, because we'll be coming back with next week with a little bit of delegates, a lot of delegates from Pennsylvania. So I will be back to you